So last time we talked a little bit about languages that you could use to display information on a website. And this language was HTML. And what we ended up with was this sort of website about, well, at least I made a website about web design tips. You guys hopefully made a website about something different. And it looks really, really ugly. Doesn't really look like the websites you're used to. What we want to do is take this and make it look better. So that brings us on to the next language that I'm going to explain to you, which is called CSS. And it's all about adding style. So this is about taking the information that's on a web page and changing how it looks, hopefully for the better. So what we want to do is firstly just try and go and set up a CSS file that describes some basic styles. So here I am in our index.html. This is the HTML file that I wrote last time. If you're new or you're just joining us, a reminder that from the notes page you can go to view code examples on GitHub, and you can take a look at the finished product of every stage. So here under examples HTML, here's the file that I'm writing with some comments as well. You can copy and paste that so you don't you can start where I'm starting from. Okay, so here we have our HTML file. What we want to do is create a CSS file. We're going to call it main.css. And just like our index.html file, the word main is mainly by convention. There's no particular reason for calling it main. And the .css is to indicate that it is a CSS file. Now I'm just going to write out a snippet of code, a snippet of CSS code, and I'm not going to explain what it does just for the time being or why it's structured this way. But I urge you to do the same or copy and paste this from the notes website. You can probably tell what it's going to do just by looking at it as well. What we also want to do is go into our index.html and tell this file to use that CSS file for styles. And that's done by adding another element to this head tag here. So recall that this head tag was all the things that the user can't see directly. And a CSS file is one of those things. It describes the look and feel of our page, but we don't want people to see the CSS code outright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new tag in here, and it's called a link tag. And this link tag basically means relate this file that I'm about to give you to this web page in some way. And you can do it you can describe different ways to relate, and you do that using this rel tag. And what I'm going to do is say use it as a style sheet. So rel equals style sheet means use the file for styles. And then I'm going to use this unfortunately named href attribute again, and I'm going to type in main.css. So note that that's the same name that we gave the CSS file. That's the same name that we gave the CSS file. And this is also a self-closing tag, like the image tag. So now that we've got that done, what we can do is make sure everything's saved, and then we can refresh the page, and everything going according to plan. You should see a very, very ugly blue website in front of you. I know I said we're going to make things look better, so bear with me for a moment. This is just to make sure that very clearly your CSS file is working. Okay, so now that we've written that, let's tear down exactly what we've written. So let's talk a little bit about how CSS is structured and how you can write your own. So here's a snippet of CSS code. Now, CSS is full of these declarations of how to style different elements. And they all start with this thing called a selector. And a selector is basically a way of choosing elements. In this case, the word body means select all elements of the body tag, and there is only one of them. And the body tag, remember, is everything that user can see. And then we're saying with that tag, style it in certain ways. And we describe a whole bunch of different properties. So in one example, this property is color, and we're saying set the color to white. That's the value of it. And in this case, color means the color of the text. And note the American spelling there as well. So all aspects of this is important. So these curly braces around after the selector are important. This colon is important to separate the key and the value. And this semicolon is important as well. And you can have multiple of the multiple of these declarations inside one of these curly braces. As you can see, we've got 2 right here. So let's put that into practice and add that second thing right here. So if I add color white, what I'll see in front of me now, making sure to save and then refresh, is all the text is turned white. So that's great. But what I've noticed down here is these links are now really, really, really hard to read. And I want to make them easier to read. So what I'm going to do is change the color of them as well. So I can add another selector down here called A, and then I can change its color. And maybe I want to change it to yellow. So I'm going to save that, then go here, take a look, and then you'll see that these ugly links are at least legible now, and we can read them. Okay, so that's a good point to stop, just to make sure we've got everything going. So what you want to do is create a CSS file with that little text snippet. Make sure that your website becomes blue so you know that the CSS is working. And then try changing the background or the text to a different color. And then try changing the color of other elements, maybe the headings, for example, to play around with the things that you can do. So what we've just done is we've styled elements according to different colors, and we've made a very, very ugly website, let's be honest. So let's fix that. Let's actually start making things look better instead of worse. Now, some of the quickest wins that we can have in terms of making things look good quickly is by changing maybe the colors and the fonts on our website. So let's start with colors. So firstly, you'll notice that we made these colors and we typed out things like white or blue or yellow. So we actually put in names of colors. This seems awfully restrictive, because what if you want to put in a color that isn't exactly the shade of blue that your browser chose? You want a slightly different shade of blue. And that's possible. You can actually describe any color that a computer can display. But the way that you display these colors isn't exactly intuitive. So for every color, there are a bunch of different representations. None of them really make sense if you don't understand how computers think about colors at all. And feel free to dig into the details of this, but that's not important for web design and making websites. What we really care about is what these colors look like and how we can choose them and then put them on our website. So rather than us digging into the technical details of this, what we're going to do is we're going to pick these colors visually. And there are a bunch of tools that we can use to do this. One of them that I quite like is this tool called Coolors. That is COOLORS.co. What it lets you do is actually generate entire color schemes and at random. So if you're not feeling very creative, you can create a selection of colors and just use them. So I can click this, I'm going to zoom in a bit for you. I can click this generate button and then give it a little bit of time to load. I do not want to watch a tutorial. And click on all the things, and then I'm presented with a color scheme. And I can press space to generate a new one. I've got a rough idea of what I want my website to look like. So I quite like this. Actually, no, I don't. I don't like any of those colors. I'm going to keep hitting space. That is just all white. So, okay. This is taking a while. All right, so I quite like this darkish blue for my text. So I'm actually going to lock that in, and then I can keep generating new colors, but not change that one until I see one that I like. So I'm kind of looking for a very light background color, maybe sort of bluey tinted. And if I see one that I kind of like the look of, I can also go into it and I can change the specific parameters. So I can make this this color right here a little bluey, more bluey, and then make it maybe a little bit lighter. And then I can keep generating new colors. I'm also looking for a really bright blue. Not that one. Looking for a bright blue and sort of like a nice green. Okay, that's a good blue. That's the kind of blue I want. And let's try and get, well, I mean, that's kind of green, but it's very green. Let's cool that off a bit. Maybe make it a bit darker. Okay. And there's this very, very bright green here, which I might use, but I might not. But now I've got a selection of different colors. And now I can put them to use. So what I can do is actually I can copy these little codes down the bottom and then use them as colors. So I've just copied this, and then I can go back to my CSS file, and instead of this blue background, I can change it to this color. Now note that when I copied it, it only included these 6 characters and not this little hash at the beginning. The hash is important. You need it for it to be considered a color. And I want the text to be this sort of darker blue, so I can grab that. And I also want links instead of this yellow to be this bright blue. And as well as that, I want my headings to be that greeny color. And what I can do is, because there are lots of headings, there's H1 through 6, that's 6 different elements. Rather than creating a entire different declaration for each one, I can combine them all into one selector by using this comma, which basically means select everything that is delimited by the commas. And I want to make them that greeny color. So after that, what I can do is I can go back to my website, hit refresh, and breathe a sigh of relief as things are actually starting to look a little bit nicer. Still not great, but definitely a little easier on the eyes than the black and white or the blue and white that we were dealing with before. So that's a good step. Now, the other thing that I mentioned that could be a good quick win is by changing the fonts. Now, just a reminder, fonts are basically the shape of each individual letter. So it actually quite considerably changes the personality of your website by choosing different kinds of fonts. And a good website something that is difficult about fonts is that it's very hard to guarantee what is on somebody's system. So all of you are on different computers, and there's a good chance that all of you have completely different fonts available to use. And that makes it problematic for us who want to, show somebody a specific font. Fortunately, CSS allows us to send somebody a specific font just for using on a particular website. And a good website for browsing different fonts and making it very easy to use them is this thing called Google Fonts. And this has a selection of lots and lots of fonts of different styles that are completely free to use. And that's great. There are also search parameters, so I can change what kind of fonts I'm looking for. So for example, if I'm only interested in serif fonts, and those are the ones with those tails at the ends of letters, I can do that. Or if I only want sans serif fonts, which don't have the tails, I can search for those. In my case, I'm interested in a sans serif font. And scrolling down through these, see what's interesting. I quite look at this Muley font, and I'm going to click this plus button to select it, and then I can click on this bar down the bottom to actually figure out how to embed it. Something worth noticing is that under this Customize tab, we've got a whole bunch of variants of the font. Now, you can see there are quite a lot, ranging in how thick the font is to italics and things like that. And by default, you only get the default one. And that's because loading in all of these could be quite slow, adds a lot of bulk to your website. And if you're not using all these things, there's no point in including them. So they're off by default. But I'm interested in italic because I use those. I use those in my EM tag. And I'm also interested in bold because I use that in my strong tag. So after I've ticked those, I can then, the embed code then changes slightly, and I can embed this font. So it gives me this snippet of HTML, and it says to embed your selected fonts into a web page, copy this code into the head of your HTML document. Again, we're using the head tag. So I'm going to grab this CSS. I'm actually going to put it above my CSS, and the fonts should be available for me to use now. I've actually got to put them to use, but they should be available. So the second thing they give us is this snippet of CSS, and it says use the following CSS rules to apply these families. So I can copy and paste that and put that into my body. And you can see here that it is applying to the font family property this name called Muley, because that's the font that I was interested in. So if I go to my website now and hit refresh, you can see that the fonts have changed. And this is looking a lot more like the kind of website I wanted. Now, for your website, you probably want a slightly different style, slightly different feel of your font. And I'd encourage you to experiment with using different fonts. Something worth possibly exploring is maybe having a different one for your headings than for your main text. So that's something that's on this Hackers at Cambridge website. You'll notice at the very top, this Introduction to Web Development heading is a different font to the body. They look different, and you can achieve interesting stylistic effects with those kinds of choices. So now's another good time to pause. So try and create a color scheme, and then once you've created a color scheme that you like, pick the colors from it and put it on your website. Try choosing a font or two from Google Fonts, and then embed them on your website, and then make sure the website actually uses them. And finally, try experimenting if you want with making the headings on your website have different fonts to your to the body.